It was supposed to be the trip of our lives. Senior year, spring of 1993. We were just weeks away from graduation in our small Missouri town, tucked between soybean fields and muddy creeks. Every class before us had taken the same trip, a 3-day retreat to the Ozarks. Campfire songs, canoeing, junk food, and late-night truths. A final memory before we'd scatter like dandelion seeds into the real world. But they never came back. I wasn't on the bus. I still don't know if that makes me lucky or cursed. My name is Aaron Whitlow, and I had the flu that morning, a fever of 102 and a cough that left me breathless. My mom wouldn't let me go. I remember sitting in the living room, still in my pajamas, watching them load into the yellow school bus in the morning fog. They were laughing, tossing backpacks through windows, arguing over who got the back seat. My best friend, David Halpern, gave me a thumbs up from the window and yelled, "Don't die without us, Whitlow." I forced a weak smile. That was the last time anyone saw them. 22 students, 1 teacher, 1 driver, a full bus, all gone. The official story was that the floods took them. That same afternoon, the rains came hard, the kind that makes rivers forget their boundaries. Roads washed out, bridges buckled, the kind of rain that makes your dad put sandbags around the garage. It came fast and didn't stop for hours. The region was under a flash flood warning by dusk, but no one thought the bus would be caught in it. They were supposed to be hours south by then. They weren't. That night, parents began calling the school. No answer. The camp never checked them in. By the time authorities started looking, roads were underwater. Days later, when the rain finally stopped, search teams found debris from what looked like a bus crash deep in the backwoods near the Gasconade River. But no bodies, no backpacks, no clothes, no tires, just a twisted metal railing, a cracked rearview mirror, and 1 muddy varsity jacket that belonged to Henry Lovell, the quarterback. I still remember the way his mom screamed on the news. For weeks they kept looking. Helicopters, dogs, divers, volunteers. The water had carried cars downriver. Entire sheds floated past towns like they were paper boats. So it wasn't impossible to believe the river had taken the bus too. Maybe it broke apart. Maybe the kids were scattered so far no one could piece it back together. That's what they told us, that it was a tragedy, a freak disaster that we needed to heal. But no one in our town really did. For a long time I avoided talking about it. Survivor's guilt, I guess. I spent years trying to forget the faces, the jokes, the inside stories from our final year. But forgetting is hard when every corner of the school felt like a tomb. Empty lockers still had faded stickers. The senior mural was half finished. Some teachers never came back. And then 10 years later, something changed. I'd moved to Kansas City by then, trying to live a normal life. I was working in it, not doing much, just passing the time. One day I got a letter in the mail, no return address. Inside was a photo. It showed a wooden church pew, old, weather-worn. Carved into the side in deep, uneven scratches were 22 names, names I knew like my own. David Halpern, Marie Green, Henry Lovell, all of them. And at the bottom, 1 line burned into the wood, "We are still here." My stomach dropped. I stared at it for hours. Not one person outside of our town could have known all their names not like that. And the handwriting, it looked like David's. I used to copy his notes when I was sick. I knew that sharp curve in his capital H. I hadn't stepped foot back in my hometown in years, but that night I packed a bag. Because something in my gut told me, this story isn't over. Driving back into Dawson Creek felt like entering a memory I didn't ask to relive. The same cracked highway signs, the old water tower with flaking paint that once read "Go Bobcats," now faded to just "Go Bo." Even the gas station on Route 7 still had that busted Coke machine that ate your change and gave nothing back. It had been a decade since I left, and nothing seemed to have changed, which made the silence feel louder. I pulled into town just before dusk. The sky was swollen with low clouds, and the air had that electric tension you feel before a storm. Main Street was emptier than I remembered. Some shops were boarded up, others just hollow, like nobody had bothered to take down the signage after closing for good. The diner was still there, though. Same name, same yellowed curtains. My first stop wasn't the police or the school. It was Pastor Will's church. He had been the one constant in that town. Baptisms, weddings, funerals. He'd prayed with our families when the search parties gave up. He'd presided over 23 empty coffins. If anyone had heard whispers about a pew with names carved into it, it would be him. The church door creaked as I stepped inside. It smelled of pine cleaner and candle wax, just like I remembered from Sunday mornings. The sanctuary was dimly lit, and I could hear soft humming echoing off the walls. In the front pew, Pastor Will sat alone, head bowed. He looked older, of course, grayer, thinner, but his eyes lifted to mine like he'd been expecting me all along. "Aaron Whitlow," he said, rising slowly, "thought you'd never come back." I pulled the photo from my jacket pocket and handed it to him. He stared at it for a long time before speaking. "Where did you get this?" "No idea," I answered. "It came in the mail. No name, no address, but I know that pew's not from here." "No," he said, voice dry. "That's not from here, but I've seen it before." My chest tightened. "Where?" He motioned for me to sit. The pews creaked under us. The silence between us stretched until it broke under the weight of what he finally said. "7 years ago," he began, "a hunter came to me. Said he found something strange while tracking deer up near North Mill Ridge, a clearing in the woods, some kind of shelter, not a house, not a cabin, just wood walls nailed haphazardly, covered in moss. Inside was a church bench, just one. He said it gave him chills." He paused, looking down at the photo. He didn't go back, didn't want to, but he described carvings, names. I tried to get him to show me, but by the time we went up there, the place was gone. "Gone?" I asked, "like destroyed?" He shook his head. "No, like it had never been there, just empty woods." I rubbed my hands together, trying to shake the chill that crept up my spine. "You think someone moved it?" "I think someone doesn't want to be found," he said quietly. We sat in silence for a moment, the air heavy with everything unsaid. Then he asked, "You planning to go looking?" I nodded. "I have to, if there's a chance they're out there." "You won't be the first," he said, "but you might be the last." His words settled like a stone in my chest. That night I checked into the only motel still open in town, the Riverbend Inn. Same faded sign, same flickering vacancy light. The woman at the desk didn't recognize me, or maybe she did and just didn't want to remember. In my room, I spread out an old topographic map of the area on the bed and traced my finger over the hills and back roads around North Mill Ridge. If I was going to find that hidden place, it would be there. But something gnawed at me. Why now? Why would someone send that photo after all these years? Why the message, "We are still here"? And if they really were, what had kept them away for so long? I didn't sleep much that night. The rain started around midnight, a steady rhythm on the window, familiar, unforgiving. The same kind of rain that came down the day the bus disappeared. The rain hadn't let up by morning. I stood in the motel parking lot, backpack slung over one shoulder, thermos of black coffee in hand, staring at the gray sky like it owed me answers. The clerk had told me the trailhead near North Mill Ridge was barely used anymore. Most hikers avoided it after the '93 floods, claiming the terrain had changed, trails washed out, markers gone. Some called it cursed. Others just said it wasn't worth the trouble. But I wasn't looking for a hiking experience. I was looking for ghosts without believing in them. I drove east for 20 minutes until the blacktop faded to gravel. Trees leaned in from both sides like they were whispering to each other, and the fog hovered low, clinging to the forest floor like breath. When I finally reached the old trailhead, the wooden sign was still there, crooked, splintered, half swallowed by ivy. North Mill Loop, 2.3 miles. I parked the car, locked the doors, and stepped into the trees. The first mile was manageable. Damp leaves, muddy roots, nothing worse than I remembered from scout camp. But the deeper I went, the more unfamiliar everything became. Trees stood taller, too close together, casting long shadows even in the daylight. Birdsong gave way to silence. Every twig that cracked under my boots made me flinch. I kept thinking about that line in the photo, "We are still here." Was it a warning, a plea, a lie? About an hour in, I found something. A clearing just like Pastor Will had described, round, unnatural, the kind of space that didn't happen by accident. No grass, no flowers, just damp earth and rot, and in the center, a rectangle of disturbed soil, like something had been moved or buried. I stood there for a long time. The wind had died and the woods had gone still. My heart pounded. I didn't know what I was expecting: bones, a bus wheel, a sign. But what I saw next froze me in place. Scratched into the bark of a nearby tree were 3 letters. D.H. David Halpern. I reached out, ran my fingers across the grooves. They were old, faded, but real. I scanned the trees around it. More carvings. MGCSRY names. Initials, all from that class. It was like a roll call of the vanished. I pulled out my phone and started taking photos. As I stepped around the clearing, I noticed a narrow path leading off to the right. Not a trail, more like a series of flattened footprints, half swallowed by moss and time. Still, something about them felt deliberate. I followed. The path twisted for maybe 15 minutes before the trees opened up again, not to another clearing, but to a structure. It took me a second to recognize it. Four walls, no roof, boards nailed haphazardly, one open doorway, no windows, the shelter, just like the hunter had described. It looked more like a forgotten shack than a chapel, but inside, on the far end, beneath vines and dirt, sat a single wooden pew. My breath caught. It was the pew from the photo. Same grain, same splinters, same names. I crossed the threshold like stepping into sacred ground. The air inside was thick, stale, but not abandoned. My boots scuffed the floorboards and dust rose in lazy spirals. I moved closer, brushing away the leaves and grime. The carvings were deep, fresh enough to be recent. They hadn't faded. And at the base, one more line had been added. We remember everything. That's when I heard it, the unmistakable snap of a branch behind me. I turned sharply, heart in my throat. Nothing. The woods outside were still, but the silence felt different now. Like something or someone was holding its breath. I backed away slowly, out of the shelter, scanning the trees. That's when I saw it. On the far edge of the tree line. A figure. Too far to make out details, but tall, still, watching. I froze. Hello, I called, voice cracking. No response. I took one step forward, and the figure turned and disappeared into the trees. Gone like smoke. I didn't chase it. I couldn't. Because for the first time since 1993, I truly believed something about the story we were told was wrong. Very, very wrong. I made it back to the car just before sunset, soaked through with sweat and rain. My hands wouldn't stop shaking, and my breath felt shallow like I'd been holding it for hours without realizing. I didn't look back once as I jogged down the trail, not when I passed the carved trees, not even when I thought I heard movement again behind me. Once inside the car, I locked the doors and sat for a few minutes in silence. The image of that wooden pew burned in my mind. The names, the fresh carving, the shadow in the trees. We remember everything. What did that mean? I pulled out my phone to look through the pictures. They were blurry, the low light and the shaking hands didn't help, but the carvings were there. The initials, the structure, the bench, and one more thing I hadn't noticed in person. At the top corner of the pew, barely visible, were numbers. 11-0-52-1001. A date. 8 years after the flood. What happened that day? Back in town, I headed straight for the library. I didn't care that they were close to locking up. I knew the clerk, an old woman named Iris who had been the school's secretary before she retired. When she saw me, her eyes softened. Aaron, she whispered, like she wasn't sure if I was a ghost or a memory. I told her I needed to see the old newspapers, anything from 2001. She led me to the microfilm reader in the back, pulled the right roll and left me alone with it. The machine whirred to life, humming as I turned the dial. Days passed with each flick, then weeks, then I slowed down, October, then November. And there it was. November 5th, 2001. A tiny article buried on page 3. Local farmer finds human remains near North Mill Ridge. My heart stopped. I read every word like it was a confession. While clearing brush on the back edge of his property, local resident Charles Langley discovered what he believed to be animal bones. Upon further investigation, sheriff's deputies confirmed the presence of several fragments determined to be human in origin. Due to the degraded condition and exposure to elements, identification was inconclusive. Authorities have not confirmed any link to the 1993 senior class disappearance. That was it. No follow-up, no headlines, no DNA testing, no statement from the families. Just silence. I sat back in the chair, dizzy. Why hadn't anyone told us? Why wasn't this part of the story we were fed for years? 23 people vanished, and then 8 years later, bones turn up in the same woods, and nobody said a word. I scrolled forward in the records, nothing more. The case was buried, literally and figuratively. Iris returned with a cup of coffee, sensing something in my expression. Did you find what you were looking for? She asked softly. I shook my head. No, I found something I didn't know I needed. That night, I drove out to the Langley farm. It was dark by the time I got there, and the long gravel driveway looked abandoned, but a porch light was on, and an old pickup sat rusting beside the barn. I knocked twice. The man who opened the door was tall, bearded, and carried years in his eyes. "You're not selling anything, are you?" "No," I said. "I'm here about the woods behind your property." He didn't flinch, just stared at me for a moment. "You're one of them, aren't you, the kids who didn't go?" I nodded. He stepped aside. Inside, the house smelled like wood smoke and oil. A fire crackled in the hearth. He motioned for me to sit, and we talked. For hours. He told me about that day in 2001, how he found the bones near a shallow ravine, how the sheriff asked him not to speak to the press, how a man in a government car showed up the next day and took everything. "They said it was too degraded to confirm anything," he muttered, "but I know what I saw." "What did you say?" He looked at me with eyes that hadn't forgotten. "A ring, one of those class rings, gold with a red stone, DHS 93 on it." I closed my eyes. That was David's ring. He never took it off. I didn't sleep that night either. My motel room felt smaller than before. The wind howled outside, and the rain slapped the windows like fingers tapping for attention. Something was building, I could feel it. And whoever sent that photo. They weren't done talking. I woke to a knock on the door. Not the pounding kind, soft, deliberate, like someone who didn't want to be heard by anyone else. I checked the clock. 5:42 a.m. The motel was dead quiet. I sat up slowly, heart thudding. The knock came again, 2 taps this time. I slid off the bed and stepped to the door, pressing my eye against the peephole. Nothing. No one. Just the soft orange haze of the parking lot light and the mist that hung low across the asphalt. I unlocked the door and opened it, cautiously. Still nothing except for an envelope. It was resting right in the center of the welcome mat, damp with dew but otherwise untouched. No name, no stamp, just sealed with a strip of red tape. I brought it inside and tore it open carefully. Inside was a single page, typed, no handwriting this time. "You're not supposed to remember. But you do. That's good. Go to locker 132. Take nothing. Tell no one." My pulse quickened. Locker 132. It didn't say where, but I knew. Dawson High. I hadn't stepped inside the school since graduation week. Most of the building had been remodeled after the flood year, new gym, new science wing. But the old lockers were still there, untouched on the west side of the building, the section they stopped using after the tragedy. It was sealed off, mostly for respect, but anyone local knew it was because the school didn't know what to do with it. That hallway was like a frozen museum of 1993. By 7 a.m., I was parked behind the school, next to the maintenance shed. I still remembered the way in, a side door near the old art room that stuck when it rained. It hadn't changed. I wedged it open with a crowbar and slipped inside. The hallway smelled like time. Dust, old paper, a faint hint of mildew. The lockers were a faded seafoam green, many of them scratched or dented. I walked slowly, counting off the numbers. 126, 128, 130. Locker 132. It belonged to Natalie James. She sat 2 rows in front of me in Mr. Dunley's English class, always had a braid over one shoulder and carried those spiral notebooks she never let anyone read. She wrote poetry, the real kind, not the teenage kind. She was supposed to go to NYU. I stared at the locker for a long time, then I tried the latch. It opened. Inside, there was nothing on the hooks, no backpack, no books, just a cassette tape and a folded map. The tape had no label, just a small sticker that said, "Play me." The map was hand-drawn, rough but detailed. Trails, paths, an X marked at the edge of what looked like a ravine, near the ridge. Near the shelter. I pocketed both and closed the locker. Before I left, I looked around the hallway one last time. Most of the locker nameplates were gone, but the memories weren't. David used to kick the corner of his locker when it got jammed. Henry and Mark would always fake box at the water fountain. Marie would sing softly when she thought no one was listening. It was all still there, just buried under years of silence. Back at the motel, I found an old Walkman in my car's emergency kit. I slid the tape in, pressed play. The audio hissed to life. Then came a voice. Shaky, familiar. Natalie. If you're hearing this, it means you didn't forget. One of you didn't forget. They said we weren't allowed to say anything, that the world would never understand. but I can't die with this inside me." Her breath caught on the tape. She sounded like she was hiding. "We were taken not by people, not in the way you think. It wasn't a flood. It wasn't an accident. We were led, and we followed, because it looked like home. It sounded like home, but it was." There was silence. Then, "I don't know how we got out. I only know that we didn't all make it. Some of them are still there. Some of them changed. If you're going to look for us, don't go alone, and whatever you do." Another pause. "Don't follow the singing." The tape ended with static. I sat there for a long time, not sure what I was feeling. Natalie's voice had sounded real. Not broken, not drugged, not theatrical. It sounded like her, like the girl who read her own eulogy aloud during our senior poetry showcase as a joke. But this wasn't a joke. And if she had been alive after the floods, why hadn't she come home? Why had none of them? I unfolded the map again, traced the trail with my finger. Something was waiting at that ravine, something more than memory. I packed my bag. Because if Natalie was right, the past wasn't done with me. And I was about to walk straight into it. The forest greeted me like it had before, damp, quiet, indifferent. But this time I wasn't retracing my steps. I was following Natalie's map. Her hand-drawn markers were clearer than any GPS. She had noted bends in the trail, landmarks only someone who had walked it or been trapped in it would know. There was even a small scribbled warning beside a fork in the trail. Left is safe, right echoes. I took the left. The path was narrower than the one I'd taken before, overgrown in places, as if it hadn't been used in years. Tree limbs scraped my jacket. The mud sucked at my boots. I kept my eyes on the map, one step at a time, the weight of the cassette tape in my pocket like a heartbeat. After an hour, the sounds began. Not birds, not animals. Humming. Soft and slow, just a few notes, distant but distinct. It rose and fell like someone testing their voice, a lullaby sung underwater. I froze, the hair on the back of my neck standing up. Natalie's voice came back to me from the tape. "Don't follow the singing." But I wasn't following it, not yet. It drifted from the right, from the thick trees beyond the path. I stayed left, exactly as marked, even when my instincts screamed otherwise. I kept going until the trail dipped downward toward the ravine Natalie had marked with the red X. When I reached it, I didn't see a camp, or a bus, or any bodies. I saw stairs. Carved into the hillside, stone steps, narrow, slick with moss and rain. They looked old, too old to be from 1993. Some were cracked, one was broken completely, but they descended deep, vanishing into the earth like an invitation. Or a trap. I paused at the top, map clenched in my hand. Natalie hadn't drawn stairs, just an X and a note beside it. Beneath the noise, beneath the lies. I took the first step. Then another. And another. The air changed with each one, colder, wetter, the kind of damp that gets into your bones. When I reached the bottom, maybe 30 feet down, I found a corridor, rough stone walls, barely wide enough for my shoulders. It stretched out into darkness. My flashlight flickered on. The tunnel wasn't natural. The walls were marked, not with carvings, but with fingerprints. Dozens, maybe hundreds of smeared black marks, like people had run their hands along the wall as they passed through. The stone beneath was stained. I followed them. 20 paces in, I heard something behind me. Another hum. Closer now. I turned, beam slicing through the tunnel. Nothing. I picked up the pace, heart hammering, boots scraping on stone. The tunnel twisted left, then right, then opened suddenly into a chamber, a wide space carved roughly into the earth, like an underground chapel. And in the middle of it, a circle of shoes. Old shoes. 23 pairs, arranged in a perfect ring. I stepped forward, light sweeping over the floor. Names were etched into the stone beneath each pair, not carved, but scratched in jagged letters, desperate, like they'd been made with nails. Each one had a name I knew. Marie Green. Tyler Boone. David Halpern. But one pair, Natalie's, was missing. Before I could process more, a sound rose behind me, footsteps fast. I spun around. A figure. Same as before, tall, still, almost familiar. This time I stepped toward it. "Who are you?" I demanded, voice echoing. It stepped closer, and the light hit its face. I staggered back. David. But not the David I remembered. His face was older, but not right. His eyes were hollow, not like someone who'd been through pain, but like someone who had left something behind, something human. He opened his mouth. The sound that came out wasn't a greeting. It was the song. That same humming, wordless, cold. More voices joined behind him. I turned my flashlight wildly, more figures emerging from the tunnel, all familiar, all wrong, faces I'd seen in yearbooks now changed, pale, distant, moving in rhythm. I backed away slowly, heart pounding. They didn't follow. They just stood there, humming, watching, and then David raised a hand slowly and pointed at me. I didn't wait. I turned and ran up the tunnel, up the stairs, through the trees, not stopping until the forest gave way to light again and I collapsed beside my car. I don't remember unlocking the door. I don't remember starting the engine, but I remember the humming, still faint, still trailing me until I hit the highway. And then silence. Like it had never happened. Like I had imagined it. But I didn't imagine the tape. Or the names in stone. Or David's face. They were still there. Still waiting. Still singing. I didn't go back to the motel. I couldn't. Not with their faces still burned into my mind, David's hollow stare, Marie's crooked posture, the way they stood in silence until that awful sound came spilling from their mouths. It wasn't music. It wasn't human. It was like remembering something you were never supposed to hear. I kept driving, heading west out of Dawson Creek. I didn't stop until I hit a rest station off I-44, an hour and a half away. I sat in the car with the engine running, doors locked, headlights still on. I must have looked like a man who'd seen something unspeakable. Because that's what I was. I tried to convince myself it was trauma, a projection, an echo of the grief I never processed, but I knew what I saw. They weren't hallucinations. They weren't ghosts either. They were something in between, caught, trapped, maybe even preserved. Whatever happened down there, it didn't kill them in the traditional sense. It changed them. And Natalie, she'd escaped, or at least gotten far enough to warn someone. That's when it hit me. Natalie had to still be alive. Or someone was pretending to be her and sending these messages. I reached for the tape recorder, still in my backpack. I listened again, slower this time, focusing not just on her voice but what was behind it, the faint clicks, the subtle creaks. The tape didn't sound like it was recorded outside or in a home. It echoed slightly, the kind of reverberation you only get in a small enclosed space, a garage maybe, or a basement. I played it again and caught something I hadn't heard before. Right before she says, "Some of them are still there," there's a soft metallic clang in the background. Like a chain. I sat back, thoughts racing. If she was still alive or had been when the tape was made, she might be nearby, hidden, watching. Or worse, she might be caged. I knew who I had to talk to next. Travis Roy. He was a janitor at Dawson High back in the 90s. Quiet guy, worked nights. But after the floods, something changed in him. He quit suddenly, moved out to an isolated property west of town, and rarely came back. Rumors spread like they do in small towns that he saw something the night the bus disappeared, that he helped clean something up, that he was paid to forget. He was the last adult at the school to see the students leave that morning. I found his address buried in an old local directory, drove straight there without thinking. A single-story house at the edge of the woods, roof sagging, porch light flickering in the daylight. The mailbox was gone, the gravel driveway grown over with weeds. I knocked 3 times. No answer. I knocked again. Then the door creaked open, just a few inches. And a raspy voice called out, "Go away." "Mr. Roy," I said, "my name is Aaron Whitlow. I was a senior in '93. I didn't get on the bus." A long silence. Then the door opened all the way. He hadn't aged well, gray stubble, sunken eyes, hands that shook even when they were still. But when he looked at me, something shifted in his expression, recognition or guilt. "You should have stayed gone," he said. I stepped inside before he could change his mind. The house was dark, dusty. The curtains were drawn. The air smelled like mold and oil. He motioned to a chair and sat across from me without speaking. We stared at each other for a while before he broke the silence. "They weren't supposed to go." I frowned. "What do you mean?" "They changed the route," he muttered. That morning, told the driver last minute, said there was flooding on the southern road, needed to reroute through Mill Ridge, but there wasn't any rain yet, not a drop. I leaned forward. Who told him? He hesitated. Man in a suit, not from the school, said he was District Transportation Authority, had paperwork, orders. The driver didn't question it. Did you? He laughed bitterly. I was a janitor, kid. Nobody listened to me when the boiler was leaking. You think they'd care if I said a route change didn't feel right? I pulled the tape from my bag, set it on the table. You ever hear this before? He stared at it like it was radioactive, then nodded. She sent it, he whispered. Few years after, slipped it in my mailbox. No name, just that tape and a note. They remember. Did you go looking? I tried, he said. Found the clearing, saw the pew, didn't go further. Why not? He looked up at me, eyes wide, voice flat. Because I started humming. That chilled me to my core. I didn't even notice, he continued. Just walking, breathing, and then it was coming out of my mouth. That same tune, like something was pulling it from my chest. He lined ends. It's not just memory, Whitlow, it's something older. It keeps them there, feeds on them, anyone who gets too close. I swallowed. You think it got Natalie? I think she escaped, but part of her stayed behind. He stood up suddenly, went to a drawer, and came back with an envelope. Inside were photos, Polaroids, one of the clearing, one of the stairs, and one I'll never forget. Natalie. Standing at the edge of the ravine, skinny, dirty, but alive, her eyes were looking off camera like she was watching something just beyond the frame. The date at the bottom read, 2/13/2002. She made it out. Now I had a new goal. Find Natalie. Before the forest took her back. I stared at the photo until my fingers went numb. Natalie's face, gaunt but unmistakable, was etched into it like a ghost refusing to fade. She wasn't looking at the camera. She was looking at something behind it. Her shoulders were drawn tight, and one hand was clenched like she was bracing herself. The timestamp was real. I flipped the photo over. In faint pencil were the words, she didn't want to be seen. I looked up at Travis. Where was this taken? His eyes flicked away. West side of Mill Ridge, near the drop-off trail. That's where I saw her. You talked to her? He shook his head. No, I tried. I called out to her, but she ran, fast, disappeared into the trees like she'd done it before. Why didn't you follow? I wanted to, he said, but something stopped me. Not fear exactly, more like the trees themselves didn't want me in there. I stood. You still have the coordinates. He grabbed a worn topo map from the shelf, unfolded it on the table. His fingers trembled as he circled an area with a red marker. Here, you'll have to go by foot, no trail anymore. I took the map. If I find her. She might not want to be found, he said, voice low, and if she does, that might be worse. I left his house just after 3 p.m., the sun already beginning its slow descent behind the hills. I filled the tank, grabbed food I wouldn't eat, and drove straight for the forest again. This time I didn't feel like I was trespassing. This time I felt expected. The drop-off trail was barely visible, just a slope where erosion had worn down the old hiking path. Trees had reclaimed most of it. I pushed through brambles and ducked beneath limbs that clawed at my clothes like fingers. I kept checking the map, one landmark at a time. At some point, I stopped hearing birds. At some point, I started hearing breathing. Not mine, not animals. Something slow, deep, almost rhythmic, like the forest was asleep but dreaming. I reached the spot circled on Travis's map by twilight. A clearing sat nestled between two ridges. In the center stood a small wooden shack, no bigger than a garden shed. It leaned to one side, door cracked, windows missing. Grass grew wild around it. No footprints, no sign of life. But the hair on my neck stood up anyway. I approached slowly, one step at a time. Inside it was empty, dusty, a metal cot in the corner, a chipped enamel basin, a pile of old clothes neatly folded, and on the wall dozens of strings pinned like a spiderweb, each tied to notes, scraps, torn notebook pages. Natalie's handwriting. She had been here. I scanned the notes, some were simple. He walks with their face but not their name. The song comes before the forgetting. Light confuses them, fire drives them out. Others were direct. If you're reading this, they know. I turned at a sound behind me, a branch snapping. I stepped out of the shack, flashlight raised. A figure stood just beyond the tree line, thin, barefoot, watching. Natalie, I called. She didn't move. I took a cautious step forward. It's me, Aaron, from school. I didn't go on the trip. I've been looking for you. She tilted her head slightly. Her eyes were wide, too wide, like they hadn't seen light in years. Her mouth opened, but no words came. Only that sound. The humming. I froze. No, I whispered. No, no, not you. But something changed in her expression. She flinched like the sound was hurting her. She clutched her ears and backed away from me, shaking her head violently. Don't let them find me, she gasped. They listen through you. Then she bolted into the trees. Natalie, I shouted, running after her. Branches whipped my face, roots tripped my steps. She was fast, impossibly fast, slipping between trunks and undergrowth like she belonged to the forest. I chased the sound of her breath, of twigs snapping. Then, just as quickly, the woods went quiet again. She was gone. But at my feet, caught on a thorn bush, was a scrap of her flannel shirt. And written in black marker on the cloth, barely visible. You can't take us all. I didn't understand what it meant. Not yet. But as I turned to head back toward the shack, the air shifted. And in the distance, the humming started again. This time in harmony. It wasn't just one voice anymore. It was many, layered, low and haunting, like a chorus trying to remember a hymn from a dream. The sound came from all around, from the trees, the earth, the sky. It wasn't loud, but it filled every inch of space, slipping under my skin like cold water. I stood frozen for a moment, heart thudding so loud I thought it might drown them out. I looked down at the piece of Natalie's shirt still clutched in my hand. You can't take us all. Was it a warning? A promise? Or a please? I didn't know which scared me more. I backed away from the thorn bush, scanning the tree line, flashlight darting. Shapes moved between trunks. I couldn't see them clearly, but I felt them. Not animals, not wind. They were circling. The shack was no longer an option. It felt like a trap now. I had to move, fast. I took the slope west, toward a path that wasn't on any map but looked like it had once been worn by feet, maybe students, maybe search teams, maybe something else. The humming grew louder as I walked. I tried not to focus on it, but it did things to my thoughts, pulled at memories, twisted them. At one point, I saw myself, at 17, walking the hall of Dawson High. Only the hallway was flooded ankle deep, and lockers wept water from every crack. I blinked and it was gone. I pushed forward. Then suddenly, silence. Not just quiet, dead. The kind of silence that makes your ears ring. No wind, no insects, just stillness. I broke through the tree line and found myself in another clearing. At the center was something new. A circle of stones arranged deliberately. Inside it, a fire pit long dead, scorched wood, blackened dirt. Around it sat 5 stumps, and on one of them a notebook. I approached cautiously. The notebook was leather-bound, water-warped but intact. I flipped it open. It was Natalie's, pages and pages of tiny, cramped writing, sketches, dates, names, symbols. Some made sense. Others felt disjointed, like she was losing time or herself. One page stood out. They keep us when we stop speaking. They forget us when we scream. Only the silence feeds them. Only memory frees us. Below it scrawled hastily, "The real bus never crashed." I stared at the words, trying to make sense of them. What did she mean, never crashed? Everyone believed the bus had been swept away. The wreckage, the torn jacket, all signs pointed to disaster. But what if that was never real? What if it had all been planted? I turned the page again. A list, names, 23, crossed out one by one. Only 3 remained. And mine was one of them. I stumbled back from the stump, the realization crashing over me. They weren't just trapped. They were being taken, one by one. And someone or something had spared me. But why? Footsteps snapped behind me, not shuffling, not slow. Running. I turned just as Natalie burst from the trees, face wild with panic. No time, she shouted. They're close. She grabbed my arm, her touch was cold, too cold, and pulled me into the woods. We ran through branches, over rocks, across a stream that barely rippled. Her pace was unsteady, like she hadn't used her legs in days, or years, but she didn't stop. After what felt like miles, we dropped behind a boulder near a dry creek bed. She was breathing hard, eyes darting. They saw you, she hissed. You stood in the circle. You heard them. That's how it starts. What are they, Natalie? I whispered. She didn't answer right away, just stared into the dark. They're what's left of us, she finally said. The part that never got off that bus. The part that followed the voice when we should have stayed quiet. They offer something, peace, clarity, answers, but it's not real. It feeds them. Her hand trembled. They don't want to kill you, Aaron. They want to keep you. I looked down at the notebook still in my hand. I think I found your list, I said. Her eyes locked onto it. Then you know how many are left. 3. She nodded. Me, you, and one more. Who? She swallowed hard. Henry Lovell. I felt the blood drain from my face. Henry, the golden boy, the quarterback, the first to always speak in class, the one whose varsity jacket was found at the site. They told us he died. They told us he'd been thrown from the bus, that animals had likely. No, she said, reading my face. He was taken, first one to walk into the woods, first one to start humming. He's not Henry anymore. I couldn't breathe. She leaned closer. We have one chance, only one. End it before they take the last of us. How? She reached into her coat and pulled out a lighter. Memory, she said. They fear fire because it forces memory. It burns the silence. Then faint in the trees, the harmony again. Closer. Too close. She met my eyes. Don't listen. But I already was. The harmony crept through the trees like fog, soft at first, almost inviting, then layered, pressing, echoing until it felt like it was coming from inside my own ribs. My pulse quickened. I clenched the notebook in one hand, the lighter in the other. Natalie was shaking. They're trying to pull you in, she whispered. The moment you hum back, even by accident, they take something. What do they take? Her jaw tensed. Pieces of you, memory, language, yourself, and once enough of you is gone, there's no fight left. The humming shifted, bending into chords that sounded almost like words. My name, a laugh I hadn't heard since high school, David's voice joking in the back of the bus. I don't know if I can resist it, I admitted. You don't have to, Natalie said. You just have to burn what they're tied to. She pointed to the notebook. Each page is an anchor, a memory I wrote down to stay me. If we burn them, the tether breaks. But they're your memories. They're already fading, she said, voice tight. They'll fade either way. I'd rather give them up on my own terms. I hesitated. Could I really help her erase herself to save both of us? But before I could speak, the air changed again. Not just sound, presence. A figure stepped out from the trees. Tall, still, watching. Henry Lovell. He looked almost exactly like the last time I saw him, Letterman jacket, straight posture, even the same haircut. But his face was wrong, too smooth. His eyes were open, but there was no light behind them. His mouth moved, but no sound came out. Until it did. The harmony split, and his voice cut through. Aaron. It didn't sound like him. It was him and something else, layered together, smooth and raw, calm and desperate. You don't have to run, just remember what it felt like to be with us, back then, before the fear. My grip on the lighter faltered. I took a step back. Natalie shoved me. Light it, she snapped. But Henry kept coming. You don't have to fight anymore. You're tired. You've been alone. We missed you. My thumb flicked the lighter wheel. Spark, spark, flame. He stopped moving. The harmony faltered. Natalie ripped a page from the notebook, one covered in her tiny, aching script. This one's for English class, she said softly. Mrs. Sutton's essay on grief. I got a B-. I was so proud. She dropped it in the flame. It curled and blackened, and from the trees came a shriek. Not from Henry, from something around him, like an entire choir recoiling from light. Henry took a staggering step back. his face twisted, as if part of him was resisting the recoil, but part of him wanted it. I stepped beside her, another page. She nodded, tears welling. Our trip to St. Louis, the Arch. I kissed Marie Green behind the vending machines. She burned that one too. The woods pulsed. The sound broke. Henry clutched his head and screamed, not just in pain, but in confusion, like something inside him didn't know how to hold together anymore. The harmony shattered. And then silence. Real empty silence. No breath, no song, no presence. The air was heavy with soot and memory. Ash floated to the ground like black snow. Henry crumpled. We stood over him, unsure of what we were looking at. His jacket was soaked with sweat, his hands curled like he was waking from a deep coma. He looked at Natalie, then at me. And for just a second, his lips moved. Whitlow. Then he passed out. We didn't speak. We just knelt there, stunned. Because if he could come back, if he could remember, it meant they all could. But only if we found them before the silence took over completely. Natalie tore the last 3 pages from the notebook, her name, mine, and Henry's. She folded them carefully, tucked them into her coat. They're the last parts we have left, she said. We carried Henry together, his weight awkward but real, back toward the shack. The sun had begun to rise. The forest was finally quiet. But I knew better than to believe it was over. Because the silence never ends. It only waits. We didn't say much on the way back. Henry stirred only once, eyes fluttering open for a breath of a second before closing again. But his body was warm, heavy, real, not the specter I'd seen standing in that underground chamber. That thing was gone. What was left was what used to be him. Or maybe what was buried underneath it. Natalie led us the long way around, avoiding the trail that had drawn me in days before. She walked like someone who knew every shadow, every hidden root, every silent threat in the trees. As we moved, the forest felt different. Still, yes, but cleaner, less charged, no humming, no flickering shapes. The air tasted like morning again, cold, wet, natural. Like the woods were trying to remember what they had once been. We made it to the shack just after sunrise. Natalie cleared a space on the floor and helped me lay Henry down gently. His breath was steady, his pulse was strong. He's coming back, I whispered. She nodded. We caught him before he was fully gone. That's rare. I looked at her. How long were you like that? She didn't answer right away, just stared at the rising sun through the broken slats of the wall. I stopped counting after the 3rd year, she said, because that's when I forgot my mother's face, and I realized time was slipping. I sat beside her. You were the one who carved the names, weren't you, on the pew? She nodded. When I escaped the first time, I couldn't carry them with me, but I had to leave something behind. I thought if someone saw our names again, really saw them, they might go looking. I reached into my bag and handed her the remaining pages from the notebook. She took them like they were bones, fragile, sacred. These are the last, I said. I know. We burned the rest, doesn't that mean? It means they can't hold them anymore, but memory still lives inside us. It's not gone, just unchained. I looked at Henry again. What happens when he wakes up? She took a long breath. He'll remember in pieces, flashes, maybe nightmares. He'll doubt himself, but if he holds on to one true memory, just one, he'll stay. We fell into silence again. Then I asked the question that had haunted me since I heard the first tape. Natalie, why didn't they take me? She turned slowly, eyes scanning my face. Because you were supposed to. I don't understand. You were meant to be on that bus. The plan was for all 23. That was the number. Whatever's buried in this forest, it needs that number. A perfect set, but you weren't there. So I broke it. You preserved it, she said. The imbalance, the missing piece, it kept the others from fully crossing over. You held the door open, and when you started remembering, you became the key. I felt dizzy. So what now? She rose, moving to a small wooden box she'd kept hidden beneath the cot. Inside were 2 cassette tapes. She handed me one. Take it to the sheriff, the real story. Names, locations, everything. Maybe he'll believe you, maybe he won't, but make it known. Truth is the only thing stronger than forgetting. And the second tape. She looked out at the trees again. That one's for whoever comes next. I stood. Henry stirred again. This time his eyes stayed open. He looked at me, really looked. Whitlow. Yeah, I whispered, kneeling. Yeah, it's me. He stared at the ceiling for a long time, then a tear slipped from the corner of his eye. I thought I was still 17. I squeezed his shoulder, so did I. Natalie handed me her lighter. You'll need it if the silence comes again. I tucked it into my pocket. As I started toward the edge of the woods, back toward the real world, I turned one last time to ask Natalie a question, but she was already gone. Just the shack, just the trees. And Henry blinking against the light. At the sheriff's office, I didn't tell the story all at once. I gave him the tape. He didn't believe me, not at first. But he listened. Then he read the list of names, the notes, the photos. And finally, he called a team to search Mill Ridge. They found the pew. They found the shack. They didn't find Natalie. But sometimes when I close my eyes at night, I can still hear her voice, not humming but speaking, not scared but strong. And sometimes, when the wind moves just right through the trees outside my window, I swear I can hear it. Not the harmonies, not the silence, just one voice, clear and steady. We are still here. And now the world knows. It took weeks for the story to spread. At first, the sheriff kept it quiet, internal reports, a private meeting with the state authorities, a carefully worded press release about evidence related to the 1993 disappearance. But small towns don't hold secrets for long. Rumors bubbled up. People started remembering. People started asking. And then someone, I never found out who, leaked the photo of the pew. The one with the names. The one with the line carved beneath them, "We are still here." That was the moment everything changed. Families came back, journalists showed up, search teams combed the forest with new eyes, new equipment, new urgency. They found remnants, old clothes, broken bracelets, initials on trees that matched yearbooks. They even reopened the cold case file. But they never found the bus. Never found a grave. Never found the thing that hummed. And they didn't find Natalie. After the second week of national coverage, the public's attention moved on as it always does. Another crisis, another mystery, but for those of us who lived it, who survived it, the memory doesn't fade. We meet once a year now, me, Henry, and the families, in a quiet field behind the church where the 23 names are etched in stone, just above an inscription that reads, "Gone, not lost, remembered, not replaced." Henry's different now. Quiet, gentle, like something inside him never fully returned, but he remembers enough. The color of the sky that day, the sound of David laughing, Marie's hair in the wind. Every year he says one more name aloud, just one. He hasn't reached David's yet. Maybe he never will. I listen. I write. I keep every page. Because someone has to. There's one last thing I've never told anyone, not Henry, not the sheriff, not even Natalie, if she's still out there. It happened the morning after I returned home, just before sunrise. I went out to the garage and found something sitting on the hood of my car. A single object. A seat. Old, worn. Bolted to nothing. But unmistakable. It was one of the school bus seats. Number 23, the last row. My name was carved into the vinyl, and beneath it in new, deliberate cuts. This seat was never filled. I stood there for a long time. Not scared, not surprised, just certain. Because I understand now. It was never about death. It was about holding on. To memory, to presence, to something not ready to be forgotten. Somewhere out there, Natalie's still walking. Somewhere out there, others might be waking. And as long as we remember their names, they are not lost. They are waiting.